It began with a knock no one should have heard. The wind was screaming through Northwood Ridge. Snow slammed the windows like 1,000 tiny fists. And deep in the forest, where even the crows flew wide, a man who hadn't spoken to another soul in years rose from his desk because someone was outside his cabin. Silas Thorne had buried his name with his wife Mara. That night he opened the door not expecting a ghost, but a girl. She was soaked to the bone, her lips blue, her coat torn. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "I only need shelter for one night," she said. He almost said no. He should have. But something in her eyes, desperation or maybe something deeper, stopped him. He let her in, and in doing so, cracked open the silence he had built around himself like stone. He had no idea then that she would stir ghosts he hadn't dared face, or that the story he thought ended with death was only beginning again. Stay with this story because what she's running from might break him. But what brings her back will change everything. The knock came again, quieter this time. As if even the person outside wasn't sure they deserved to be heard, Silas Thorne stood motionless by the fireplace, fingers frozen around the iron poker. The fire crackled behind him, casting tall shadows against the log walls. He hadn't had a visitor in over 5 years. No one knew he was here. That was the point. Outside, wind whistled through pine needles and flung sleet against the windows like nails. Another knock. Silas set down the poker and crossed the creaking floorboards. The cat, grey and always nameless, darted under the table. He pulled open the heavy wooden door. There she was, a woman in her 20s, soaked to the skin, shaking violently. Her boots were caked with mud and snow, her hands red and raw, her eyes wide and too bright locked onto his. I only need shelter for one night," she said. Her voice trembled as much as her body. He didn't answer right away. His instincts screamed to send her away. People brought chaos, noise, questions. But the girl looked half dead already, and the storm behind her didn't care if she lived or froze. He stepped aside. Wordlessly, she stumbled in. The door shut behind her with a heavy thud. Silas handed her the thick wool blanket draped over the armchair. She grabbed it like a drowning woman to a rope. He pointed to the hearth where flames licked the logs, and she dropped to her knees in front of it, wrapping the blanket tightly around her frame. Silas watched her in silence. Every instinct told him to keep a distance, but something in her stillness mirrored his own. "Thank you," she murmured. Her teeth clacked as she pressed closer to the fire. He gave a single nod and retreated to the small kitchen space. From the cabinets he pulled a pot beans, dried carrots, and smoked venison leftovers from a recent hunt. He moved automatically, building a stew without a word. She didn't ask questions. He didn't offer any. The only sounds were the pop of the fire, the soft clink of the spoon against the pot, and her slow, shallow breathing as she tried to stop shaking. When the stew was done, he handed her a bowl. Her hands trembled too hard to hold it at first. He helped guide it to her lap. Still, neither of them spoke. The cat crept out from under the table and circled her cautiously, sniffing the wet corners of her jeans. She gave it a faint smile and reached down to pet it. The cat allowed it for now. Night fell completely. Silas offered her the cot near the fireplace. He pointed wordlessly at his own room and closed the door behind him without waiting for thanks. He lay awake for a long time, staring at the wooden beams above, listening to the wind and the subtle change in the silence. Another human's breath. It had been years. Morning came in a hush. Snow had fallen deep, nearly up to the window ledges. The woods were blanketed in white, and the trail that led down the ridge was invisible. Silas brewed coffee in the old kettle, black and strong. The woman stirred on the cot, bleary-eyed and slow. Her face was softer now, without the shock of cold, though still drawn as if sleep hadn't fully claimed her. "I can go once the snow lifts," she said quietly, noticing him watching her. "I don't want to be a burden." He said nothing. Instead, he pushed a steaming mug across the table. She took it like a peace offering. "Lena," she said, as if the silence demanded a name. Silas didn't reply. He turned back to his desk in the corner, where loose pages lay covered in faint pencil scribbles and harsh red slashes. Most were blank. The few words there looked like wounds. She didn't press. The days didn't pass so much as stretch. The storm had dropped nearly 3 feet of snow, more than enough to block the only trail leading to town. The plow wouldn't come this far. There wasn't a phone line, no cell signal, just miles of forest and snowdrifts that swallowed sound. Lena stayed. She kept to herself, moving quietly around the cabin. She cleaned dishes, helped stack the logs Silas chopped each morning. She didn't speak unless spoken to, which truthfully was almost never. But she brought presents, soft things. She hummed when she stirred the pot, left folded blankets on the armrest, repaired a button on his coat without asking. And in the evenings, she would sometimes sit by the fire and tell stories, ridiculous ones. Tales of a moose who tried to learn ballet, a squirrel who thought he was royalty, a grandmother who secretly ran an underground donut cartel. Silas never laughed, but he didn't stop her. He listened. One night, as she recounted the tale of an owl who opened a detective agency, Silas caught himself waiting for the punchline, for her voice, for her. Then came the third week. He caught her standing in the hallway, eyes fixed on a small framed photograph. It was old, dust-covered, faded, a woman with wild curls and a defiant smile, her hand gripping Silas's shoulder as if anchoring him in the moment. Lena turned when she heard his footsteps. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He didn't speak, just stared at the photo. She touched the frame lightly before stepping back. "You loved her." He gave a slow nod. "She was the reason I believed in anything he said, the words rasping out like stones." A long silence. "I hope someone says that about me someday," Lena said. Even once. Silas didn't know how to reply, so he didn't. That night, a storm rolled in again. Wind slammed the shutters. Lightning split the sky. Silas sat rigid in his chair, staring at the fire. The storm always brought it back, the sound, the memory, the call that never came. The crash. Lena noticed his clenched fists, the way he blinked too often, the breath he held. But she said nothing. She simply sat near, close, not touching, but present, and something in that quietness held him. He slept better that night than he had in years. The trail was still buried beneath snow, but Lena didn't mention leaving anymore. Silas hadn't asked her to stay, and she hadn't said she would. But each morning she rose early and moved through the cabin like she belonged there, making tea, folding laundry he didn't remember, washing, setting kindling beside the fireplace before he came in from the cold. He watched her without watching. She filled spaces he had forgotten existed. Sometimes, when he chopped wood, he would glance up to see her watching him from the porch, her arms folded, her breath rising in mist. She never said a word, just gave a little nod when he looked up as if to say, "You're still here. I see you." He started to nod back. One afternoon she was humming a tune he didn't recognize while sweeping dust from the corners. He stared up from his desk. "That song," he said slowly. "What is it?" She looked surprised to hear his voice. "Oh, just something my mom used to hum when she cooked. Nothing special." He nodded once and turned back to his pages. But later that night, as the fire crackled and snow flurries danced outside the window, Silas caught himself humming it, barely audible as he stirred the stew. Lena smiled into her bowl but said nothing. A week later, Silas found himself staring at the chair across from his desk, the one no one had sat in since Mara. He didn't sit in it. Couldn't. Not yet. But for the first time in years, he dusted it off. The act made his chest ache, as if he were betraying something sacred. That same day, Lena found an old journal on the bookshelf Mara's. The name embossed in gold on the cover was nearly faded, but it shimmered in the firelight. She didn't open it. She simply placed it on Silas's desk gently and walked away. Hours passed before he dared touch it. That night, Lena made biscuits. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and butter and something that reminded Silas faintly of laughter. She spilled flour on the counter and cursed under her breath, then giggled. It was a sound that tugged at something long buried in him. When she caught him watching, she tilted her head. What she asked. "You laugh like you don't expect to," he said. Lena blinked. "Yeah, I guess I forgot how." For a while, she slid a plate of steaming biscuits toward him. "Looks like we both needed to remember a few things." Silas bit into one and nearly groaned. "Good." He nodded, then paused. "Too good," he muttered. "Now I'll expect this every night." Lena beamed at that. It was the first time he'd said something even close to teasing. The ice between them didn't shatter that night, but it cracked, audibly. It wasn't just her kindness. It was the quiet way she moved around his grief, the way she respected it like an animal in the room, acknowledged, never touched. Silas started leaving the door to his writing room open again. One day she walked by and paused. Pages were strewn across the table, handwritten notes, characters half-formed. He looked up. She didn't speak, but he slid a stack toward her slowly, as if afraid the motion would break him. She sat across from him, in Mara's old chair, and read. Silas watched her lips move as she did, the way her brow furrowed. When she finished the first page, she looked up. "You're not done," she said gently. He said nothing. But the next day he wrote another 5 pages. She read those too, and left notes in the margins. On page 3, this feels like you forgiving yourself. On page 5, this character, she sounds like her, but she also sounds like you. Silas didn't know what to say to that, so he just wrote more. But Lena had shadows too. He saw it in the way she flinched at loud sounds, how she sometimes froze when he opened the cabin door quickly, how she always left her boots pointing toward the exit as if she might need to run at any moment. He didn't ask, not yet, but one night she didn't come in for dinner. He found her outside on the porch, curled in her coat, staring up at the sky. Her breath came in sharp puffs. Her eyes glistened. He stood silently beside her for a while, then barely above the wind. "What are you running from?" Lena didn't look at him. She was quiet for a long time. Then an ex who said I was too much and not enough. All at once. Silas didn't speak. She swallowed hard. He said no one would ever love me unless I earned it. So I kept trying. And when that didn't work, I ran. Her voice broke. Maybe I'm still running. I don't even know anymore. Silas sat beside her, the old wood groaning beneath him. The wind howled, and they stayed there until dawn, not talking, just breathing, together. The next morning he found a note on his desk. "I'm not here because I'm lost. I'm here because for the first time in a long time I feel found." No name, just that. Silas folded the note carefully and slid it into the back of Mara's journal. Then he picked up his pencil and wrote, not just a sentence, but a chapter. Spring began to thaw the ridge. Birdsong returned. Buds bloomed on the branches. The snow melted from the trail in slow, slushy waves. Lena stood one morning at the edge of the path that would lead her back to town. She didn't take a step. Instead, she turned back to the cabin, to Silas. He was watching her from the porch. She smiled. He didn't say anything, but he nodded and left the door open. It had been nearly 2 months since Lena first arrived. The seasons were shifting. The harsh whites of winter gave way to deep greens and damp soil. Crocuses peeked through the earth like secrets slowly revealed. The ridge came alive again. So did Silas. He didn't speak much more than before, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't a wall, it was space. Space for something to grow. He wrote every morning now, sometimes for hours, and Lena knew not to disturb him. She only slid a cup of tea beside his elbow, always warm, always wordless. Some pages he let her read. Some he didn't. One night she found a scene on his desk, a woman alone in the woods, building a cabin from broken stones and memories. It was raw, lonely, but powerful. She left a note in the margin. "Is this still fiction?" He didn't answer. But the next scene, the woman found a bird trapped in her chimney. She let it go, and the silence it left behind somehow felt fuller. Not all days were quiet. Lena had bad ones too. Silas found her in the pantry one morning, sitting on the floor with a tin of coffee in her lap and tears staining her cheeks. "I don't know why I'm crying," she said, embarrassed. He crouched beside her. "You don't need a reason." She looked at him, surprised. "I always needed one before." That was before he said. A beat passed. Then, with a bitter laugh, she wiped her face. "He used to say I was broken in too many places, that no one should be expected to carry that." Silas's voice was low. "You don't need carrying. You just need someone who doesn't mind walking beside you." Lena stared at him for a long time, then nodded. That night she finally told him. They sat by the fire, the wind rattling the windows softly like old ghosts. "I wasn't just running from a breakup," she said, staring into the flames. "I left everything behind. My job, my apartment, my control." Silas waited. "I thought if I kept moving, kept pretending to be okay, then maybe the rest would follow. But I wasn't okay. And when the car broke down on the ridge, I think maybe some part of me was relieved. He looked at her. Because you couldn't run anymore. She nodded. They sat like that for a long time. Two people who'd lost everything they thought defined them, sitting in the middle of nowhere, building something invisible between them. Lena broke the silence with a whisper. I used to want to write. Silas blinked. You never said. She shrugged. I stopped. Figured no one cared what I had to say. He reached for the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. It was blank, untouched. He handed it to her. Start, he said. She hesitated, then took it. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't let go. A week later, she read him one of her pieces. It wasn't polished. It didn't need to be. It was about a girl on a bicycle with flat tires riding in circles because she was afraid of where the road might lead. It was short, bittersweet, honest. When she finished reading, she looked up anxiously. Well, she asked. Silas nodded slowly. You wrote something real. Tears welled in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. He didn't say more, but he kept that page, slid it into the back of his manuscript, like it belonged there. Then came the letter. It arrived in an envelope marked with a publisher's seal, addressed simply to S. Thorne, Northwood Ridge. He stared at it for a long time. Lena found him holding it unopened, his hands stiff. You're shaking, she said softly. He gave a tight nod. They want the book, he finally said. Someone must have submitted it. Lena smiled faintly. Do you want it published? I don't know. She stepped closer. You wrote it. He swallowed. I wrote it because you were here. He held up the envelope. But if I publish it, it becomes about me again. Lena studied him carefully. Maybe it's not just your story anymore. Silas looked down at the desk where her notes still sat in the margins, where her words had shaped his own. Then he opened the envelope. The manuscript sold. A modest advance. A quiet announcement. No interviews. Silas refused every request. When asked for a statement, he sent a single typed page. The story isn't mine alone. And it never was. The publisher framed it on their office wall. But success changed things. Not in the cabin. In Lena. Silas noticed her restlessness. She stayed up later, walked farther, sometimes disappeared for hours into the woods. She was searching for something. Or perhaps someone she used to be. And one morning she stood in the doorway with a small packed bag. Silas didn't look surprised. I need to go, she said. He nodded. You found something here, he said. She hesitated. I did? She stepped closer. But I also lost myself before I came. I think I need to see if she's still out there, somewhere. Silas didn't beg her to stay. He'd never been that kind of man. Instead, he walked to the desk, picked up the final printed copy of the book, handed it to her. The dedication read, For the woman who only needed shelter for one night, but gave me the courage to step outside again. Lena pressed the book to her chest. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I'll come back, she said. When he asked, she gave a faint smile. When I know who I am again. Then she turned and walked into the woods. That night the silence returned, but it didn't feel empty. Silas sat by the fire, opened the notebook Lena left behind, and read her words. She'd written dozens of pages. Some were stories. Some were just thoughts. But all of them were hers. He added one more. She left in search of herself. But she left something behind. And maybe that's what love really is. Not possession, but the courage to let someone find their own way back. He closed the book and waited. Spring turned to summer on the ridge. The sun crept higher each morning. Birds sang earlier, louder. The trees thickened with green, and the wind shifted no longer harsh, but soft, curious. And Silas Thorne stayed. The cabin remained quiet, but not hollow. The silence had changed. He still wrote each day, not to escape, but to remember. The novel, The Longest Winter, had reached readers across the country. Emails arrived by the dozens, most unanswered. Letters trickled in from those who had lost someone, those who had run from pain, those who had stayed too long in silence. One letter came from a woman in Vermont. She wrote, You made me feel like I wasn't the only one hiding from the world. Thank you for showing that even grief can make room for love again. Silas read it 3 times, then filed it in a drawer, but his fingers lingered on the envelope. He wasn't alone exactly. The cat still prowled the cabin, claiming sunlit corners and the chair Lena had used. The crows still gathered near the porch, cawing for scraps and watching him with sharp eyes. And every so often someone from town would trek up the trail to ask about the man who wrote that book. Silas never answered the door, until the day a young boy, maybe 9 or 10, stood at his porch, clutching a copy of the paperback to his chest. He wore a red hoodie and looked like he had walked a long way. Silas opened the door without thinking. The boy blinked up at him. "Are you Mr. Thorne?" Silas hesitated. "Sometimes." The boy held out the book. "My mom cried when she read this. She said it helped her. She wanted me to give you this." From his pocket, the boy pulled out a small necklace, a simple silver feather. Silas took it carefully. "Thank you." The boy nodded, then ran back down the trail, quick and light-footed. Silas stood on the porch for a long time after that, holding the feather, remembering the nights Lena had braided her hair by the fire humming. The necklace had the same kind of quiet beauty. He started writing her letters, not to send, just to write. He filled pages with stories of the ridge, the animals returning, the flowers blooming too early, the way the sun hit the floor at exactly 7:42 a.m. He wrote about his thoughts, the ones he couldn't name until they spilled out of his pen. He wrote about her laugh, her silences, her stories about the donut-smuggling grandma. Then he stopped, because he realized something. She had given him his voice back, but maybe she hadn't found hers yet. The manuscript for his second novel was different, not sadder, just deeper. It told the story of two people who met in the middle of nowhere, one who had been hiding from the world and one who had been told she didn't belong in it. They didn't fix each other. They just made space. By the end of the book, they were walking in different directions, but both were looking up. Silas hadn't spoken aloud in 3 days when he heard footsteps on the trail. It wasn't the cautious steps of hikers or the sharp, direct pace of a courier. These were slow, uncertain, familiar. He stood from his desk and walked to the door, didn't open it, not right away. He waited, and then a soft knock, just once. He opened it, and Lena stood there, hair longer, freckles darker from the sun, a canvas satchel over her shoulder, notebooks peeking out the top. She looked older and younger all at once. Her eyes met his. "I didn't bring an umbrella this time," she said with a crooked smile. Silas didn't speak. He didn't have to. He stepped back and held the door. She walked in like she had only been gone a day. They didn't embrace. Not right away. Instead, she took off her shoes, walked to the kitchen and opened the cabinet like she still knew where everything was. Silas leaned against the wall, arms crossed, just watching. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here," she said finally. "I wasn't sure you'd come back," he replied. She nodded. "I almost didn't." She took a teacup from the shelf, cradled it, looked at him. "But I found stories again." Silas gave a small smile. "I know." Lena tilted her head. "Oh," he gestured to his desk. "To write as honestly as I've been writing, I figured you must be out there somewhere doing the same." She looked down at the cup in her hands. "I miss the quiet here." "It's still quiet," he said. "Just different." She stepped closer, then closer still, and finally he reached out and took her hand. It was warmer than he remembered, and it didn't tremble. Later that night, as they sat by the fire once more, Lena opened her notebook. "I wrote something I want to read to you," she said. Silas nodded. She cleared her throat and began. "Sometimes we arrive at a place by accident. Sometimes the road breaks down, and so do we. But the place that finds us when we're most lost is often the one that knew us best all along." She looked up. "I think this cabin knew me before I did." Silas didn't answer, but his hand tightened gently around hers. The next day she unpacked her bag. Not all of it, but enough. A toothbrush, a few books, a photograph of her mother. Silas noticed, didn't comment, but he left a second mug by the kettle that morning and didn't move it. One evening he brought out the leather journal, the one she had filled before she left. He handed it to her, open to the last page. Below her words he had written, "Welcome home." She traced the letters with her finger and cried, not because she was broken, but because she wasn't anymore. The forest breathed easier that autumn. The trees blushed red and gold. Crows circled lower, slower. The chill in the air wasn't biting anymore. It was gentle, like a reminder. Silas and Lena had settled into a rhythm, not out of necessity, but choice. She hadn't said she was staying. He hadn't asked. But day after day, they both woke in the same space, drifted toward the same hearth, worked quietly across from each other at the table, pen and pencil scratching in unspoken harmony. Sometimes they wrote together, sometimes not. But words were always being born in that cabin. The silence between them was no longer a hollow pause. It was a presence, full, lived in, like breath. One morning, Lena stood at the window for a long time. She was holding her tea, but not drinking it. Outside mist curled over the ridge like a secret too old to tell. Silas watched her from his chair. "You remember the first time I knocked on that door?" she asked. "I remember thinking it was the wind playing tricks on me," he replied. She smiled. "I almost kept walking. I was so sure I didn't deserve help, that I'd ruined too many things already." Silas shifted in his seat. "You hadn't ruined anything," he said. Maybe she whispered. "But I didn't believe that then." She turned toward him. "But I do now." A pause. "Then you helped me believe that." Silas looked away, swallowing something thick in his throat. Lena stepped closer. "You helped me come back to myself." She placed a hand gently over his heart. "And this time I didn't come back for shelter." He took her hand in his and pressed it to his chest. That week she finished her first short story collection. They called it Things I Said in the Silence. Silas printed the pages for her using an old dot matrix printer he hadn't touched in years. The sound filled the cabin like laughter. Lena laughed when it jammed 3 times. "I think this thing is older than me," probably, Silas muttered. But the pages came out. Ink streaked, real. Her name on the cover. When she held the finished draft, she was quiet for a long time. "Then I never thought I'd see my name on something that felt like me." Silas smiled. "You didn't just survive the storm," he said. "You learned how to dance in the rain." She stared at him, then leaned in and kissed him, slowly, softly, like she was asking and answering at once. That winter was different, not easier, but warmer. The snow came again early this time, thick, white, merciless. But the cabin didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like shelter, the kind people returned to, the kind people chose. They made soup from scratch, lit candles at night when the generator died, played old records Silas had hidden in a crate he thought he'd never open again. One evening, Lena asked about Mara. It wasn't the first time her name had come up, but it was the first time Silas invited it. She was wildfire, he said. Bright, beautiful, impossible to hold. Lena nodded. "You loved her." "I did," he said, "and I always will. But that love doesn't keep me from loving again." He looked at her, and she understood. Love wasn't a fixed thing. It grew in the spaces it was allowed. A few months later, Silas received another letter. It was from a woman named Clarice, a friend of Mara's who'd thought him dead until the book surfaced. Her handwriting shook, but her words didn't. "She'd be proud of you," the letter said. "Not because you wrote again, but because you lived again." Silas read the letter twice, then burned it in the fire. Not out of anger, but closure. Lena's book was published in spring. Small run, indie press. But the words were hers. Her dedication read, "For the man who opened a door and showed me it was never locked in the first place." Reviews were kind, quiet. Some readers cried, others sent notes. One woman wrote, "This book let me forgive a version of myself I thought was gone." Lena read that one aloud to Silas and cried. But this time her tears weren't out of pain. They were gratitude. They never married, never exchanged vows, but every morning when they woke under the same cedar-framed roof, they chose each other again. In the way Lena placed a cup of tea on the windowsill before Silas even sat down. In the way he moved her notebook when sunlight threatened the ink. In the way they sat in silence on the porch and watched the crows settle for the night. No declarations, no grand gestures, just the choice to stay. Us. One day, years later, a hiker passed through the ridge and stopped by the cabin for water. He asked if Silas Thorne was the man who wrote The Longest Winter. Silas said yes. The hiker looked around at the cozy wood interior, at the pages scattered on the desk, at the woman humming softly in the kitchen, and said, "I always thought that book was a tragedy." Silas smiled faintly. "It's not," he said. "It's a beginning." The photograph on the wall now had 2 new frames beside it. One of Mara, one of Lena, side by side. No one replaced, only added to. Sometimes Lena would still say, "I only needed shelter for one night." And Silas would reply, "Good thing I never changed the locks." They'd laugh. And that laugh would echo through the trees, through the ridge, through every page they ever wrote. You made it to the end of this story, and maybe like Lena, you came here looking for just a moment of warmth, but stories have a strange way of becoming shelter, of reminding us that even after loss, even after silence, life continues, and sometimes it returns with more than we ever expected. Have you ever found comfort where you didn't expect it? Or been someone's unexpected shelter? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear it. And if this one meant something to you, tap that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next quiet miracle we share. Thanks for staying till the end. See you in the next one.